Hey everyone. A couple weeks ago I made a video describing and talking about why the Church of Scientology is not actually a valid or legitimate religion or religious organization. And of course that means they don't deserve tax-exempt status and First Amendment protections and that sort of thing. But something has come up just today actually, which prompted me to make this video to talk about just another aspect of why it's a sham to call Scientology a legitimate religion. What I want to talk about here specifically is a post or a job that exists within the Church of Scientology, which seems religious and seems like it has some church-like resemblance, but in fact is just another part of the con or scam of Scientology. And that post is the post of Chaplain. This is a job that is held sometimes, not all the time, in various Scientology churches. Let me give you a little bit from Hubbard on this just to totally make it clear what this is all about. Hubbard defines the purpose of the chaplain is to help Ron minister to others, to succor those who have been wronged, and to comfort those whose burdens have been too great. It should be made well known to PCs and students that when they cannot elsewhere be heard, they always have recourse to the chaplain. He is also the complaints department. The chaplain holds services where required regularly on Sunday, or marriages, christenings, or funerals. The chaplain takes over Ron's hat in all these things. So while the chaplain post might look like the most religious component of the Scientology organization, and often they'll even wear the dog collar or something priestly, or that's so some sort of look that makes them look semi-religious. In fact, what the chaplain is an extension of the ethics office. Okay, and that is the part of the organization that sees to the security and activity of Scientology moving forward and getting rid of or wiping out anything that might be getting in the way of what Scientology is trying to do. And this also, of course, includes protecting Scientology's good name and reputation. So the chaplain exists in a separate area of the organization from the ethics section, but for all intents and purposes acts almost exactly the same, with perhaps a more mild veneer. So people can approach a chaplain with the idea that they can say anything and tell them anything, but when the reports get written by the chaplain as to what went down, that information goes to the same place that the ethics reports and information go, and it's acted on in many instances in the exact same way. So the chaplain really becomes another data collection point to get information from Scientologists, which can then be used to control them. And whenever the church needs to exert control over its members, it does so by basically guilt shaming them. Because Scientologists give over their most deeply held secrets and confidences, not only in an auditing session to an auditor or a counselor, but also to the ethics officers or the chaplains. This information is collected in folders and is used to manipulate and control the members. And I just today read an article on Tony Ortega's blog about Danny Masterson's case, which is taking a very interesting and hopefully positive turn. Danny Masterson is a Scientology celebrity who has been accused by multiple victims of raping and sexually assaulting them in very violent ways. And this case has been ongoing for a very long time. Well, it turns out that the LAPD actually has been putting a very strong case with very strong consequences together against Masterson. And this is, again, potentially very good news in terms of justice for these victims. When crimes or acts of violence or acts of sexual assault or criminal activity comes up within the Church of Scientology, what's usually done is some kind of an internal investigation consisting of what are called sec checks. I've discussed these at length on this channel and other videos. They're basically interrogations, where a person is put on the Scientology e-meter and is asked sharp and pointed questions about whatever the incident or incidents in question are all about, and the person is expected to, give over all the goods, and this is all written down in the folders. In the case of Danny Masterson, his victims were interrogated and Masterson was interrogated. And in one instance, after or following the interrogation, it appears that a chaplain was brought in, or what's called in the world of Scientology a chaplain cycle or a chaplain court was held. And this would involve both parties, or all the parties involved in whatever the dispute is that's trying to be resolved, as well as maybe an administrative person to keep notes, or anybody else who is involved within the church who needs to, or for whatever reason feels they need to be part of that. In other words, be in the room with them, okay? And the way this was described by Tony, quote, "What followed those interrogations was a bizarre scene set up by the church when it insisted on putting Masterson and his accuser in the same room with 3 church members as observers. Masterson was told to listen carefully to her version of events because he was told he wasn't properly confronting what he was accused of. In other words, the Church of Scientology credited the victim's account enough to back her up as she confronted Masterson with what she remembered of that night, even if the church did not have her report findings turned over to the LAPD. Remember that the entire purpose of Scientology's ethics and every part of Scientology's organization is to protect the church first. And like has been done with the Catholic Church protecting pedophiles, completely wrong-headed, but these organizations get the idea that if this kind of activity on the part of their members or staff leaks out, that this is going to be scandalous and the organization is going to suffer in the media and with its reputation. And that's true, but they always suffer 10 times more when they try to cover this stuff up. And I really don't understand the thinking behind that, but it happens consistently with, destructive cults or groups who don't have any real sense of priority and balance of right and wrong, and put the group's needs ahead of the needs of its individual members. And when it comes to criminal activity, there really is no excuse for that. Now, in Scientology, with these chaplain courts or chaplain cycles, the effort being made is to keep it all in-house and resolve the conflict. And when it comes to criminal activity, they really should be going to the authorities and reporting criminal activity to, the law. But they don't do that. They try to resolve it in-house. And in this case, they tried to resolve it by having one of Masterson's victims air her grievances, have him, the idea being that he would listen carefully, deal with what he did, and acknowledge, the wrongness of his actions and apologize or something like that, so that she would be satisfied and the whole thing could be closed, right? And they wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. That was the hope. And I saw this happen a number of times over the years when I was in Scientology. So there's no question in my mind that that is exactly what the church intended to do, was cover this thing up and try to, give the victim, one of the victims, and there are more than just one or two, but in this particular case, try to give her some acknowledgement that she was wronged, and somehow that was supposed to be enough. Well, obviously, it's not enough, and to her credit, she did not put up with any of that and went and reported the entire thing to the police. Most of the time, in 100% of the cases I was ever involved in, or heard anything about when I was involved in Scientology, the victim is made just as responsible for what happened as the perpetrator. And this goes back to Hubbard's bizarre philosophy that a person is responsible for every single thing that ever happens to them. And he tries to couch this in strange explanations of responsibility is not blame and it's not fault or something like that. But inevitably, that's where this ends up going. As long as the church is not blamed or the church is not found at fault, Scientology's happy, right? As long as the victim is willing to take the victim shaming and the guilt for what happened to that victim. Churches, hey, good, it's on you. It's not on us. It's, and to the degree it's not on the perpetrator, they can claim that, both parties had mutual responsibility for the whole thing and just close the door on it if the parties agree that that's all the justice that they deserve. This is an enforced thing by the church. This isn't like, well, here's an option for you, and would you like to do this? That's not how it's presented. It is always presented with, this is what we're going to do, and then this is what we're going to do, and then now you were responsible for this too, so you need to deal with this and take responsibility for it and confront your part of this. I mean, can you imagine telling the victim of sexual assault that they're responsible for what happened to them? Unfortunately, it's not too hard to imagine because there are far too many people out there who do engage in victim blaming. And this is, to the shame of our society right now. But within Scientology, of course, this is just a run-of-the-mill standard operating procedure. So what you really have here is a pretense of a religious organization presenting an individual in the church, the chaplain, who is supposed to be the place of, the person of last resort, the place you can always go to, the place you can always be heard, and where you can find comfort and security. But in reality, this chaplain is just another insidious control point in this entire organizational structure that exists only to suck time and money and energy out of its membership for the good of the organization to the detriment of its membership. And this case with Masterson was a perfect example of that I thought I would use to comment on this whole structure, because this one case, as horrid and terrible and awful as it is but one example of thousands of such examples over the years, whether it involved financial fraud that the church covered up, sexual assault that the church covered up, or some other civil or criminal activity that the church deemed it best not to get beyond the walls of the church and to deal with it in-house. And this has prevented justice, real justice, for many, many, many victims of Scientology over the years. So I thought it was worthy of commenting on. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.